In a sign of the government's increasing determination to tackle a steep rise in coronavirus infections in England, there will now be stiff financial penalties for anyone failing to self-isolate after a positive coronavirus test. From September the 28th, the fine will be £1,000 and up to £10,000 for repeat offences. But those on low incomes who cannot work from home will be given a £500 lump sum. The news comes as Boris Johnson considers whether to tighten COVID-19 restrictions right across England after saying the UK is now seeing a second wave of coronavirus. Here's our political correspondent, Iain Watson.
In Preston, households are already banned from meeting other households in homes, gardens and indoor venues. From Tuesday, curfews will be imposed on pubs and restaurants in most of Lancashire and Merseyside. And tighter restrictions have already been imposed in other parts of northern England and in the Midlands, covering around 1 in 5 of the country's population.
I do have close family that passed away with COVID, so I know exactly how this is really serious.
Something needs to be done, but it is a shame, isn't it? We're not going to see our families as much. So in this way,
And with the Prime Minister warning of a second wave of the virus, the restrictions in Lancashire could be a glimpse of the future across the whole of England.
We've got to be really careful about making sure that we can keep the R rate down, the transmission rate down. So we're looking at the data. We've got a far better set of data now than we had a few months ago, and we won't be afraid to use any restrictions necessary.
The government introduced its rule of 6 only 6 days ago, yet this weekend Boris Johnson is poring over the data to find out if he needs to go any further. Now, he wants to avoid a full national lockdown. He knows that could shatter a fragile economy. So any plan that emerges from Downing Street in the next few days is likely to keep schools and offices open. But the Prime Minister also wants existing restrictions to be more tightly enforced. The government's scientific advisers have suggested that as many as 4 out of 5 people could be bending or breaking the rules on self-isolation. From the 28th of September in England, anyone with a positive coronavirus test or who's contacted by the track and trace system will have a legal duty to self-isolate. Those who don't could be fined £1,000 initially and up to £10,000 for repeat offenders. But if you're on benefits or on a low income and can't work from home, you'll receive a £500 lump sum to encourage self-isolation. In Preston, there was support for the idea of fining those who tested positive and who broke the rules.
If people are actually going out of their way to ignore the guidelines, I think it's quite fair and proper that they should get punished quite severely for that.
I think that's really not on for them to be going out and about, and they should be fined. But I think the rules now are really, really complex.
Labour say they'll support moves to control the spread of the virus, but they wouldn't have started from here.
I have to say that I think that this could have been avoided if the government had got their testing and tracing system in place. And now we're having to look at more extreme measures because the virus is out of control.
The Cabinet was briefed by the government's medical and scientific officers today. The task now for the Prime Minister is to balance the health of the nation with help for the economy. Iain Watson, BBC News.
Well, the latest government figures show the highest daily number of new infections since the recent surge began, with 4,422 new coronavirus cases recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means the average number of new cases reported per day in the last week is 3,598. And as new infections have climbed, so too have daily hospital numbers, with 227 people being admitted on September the 17th. This figure doesn't include Scotland. 27 deaths were reported of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. And that means, on average, in the last week, 19 deaths were announced every day, taking the total number across the UK to 41,759. Well, with coronavirus infections in England doubling every 7 to 8 days, ministers are seriously considering, as we've been hearing, tighter restrictions right across the country to disrupt the spread of the virus. Our health correspondent Naomi Grimley is here. Naomi, we know Boris Johnson, he doesn't want a full national lockdown. So how is the government characterising any broader national restrictions that might come in?
Well, they've trialled it as something called a circuit breaker because, as you say, they don't want the blunt instrument of a full lockdown with all the collateral damage that brings to society. And it's really aimed at one aspect in particular of our lives, which is socialising, because that is judged to be the riskiest area of transmission at the moment in the country. Now, public health experts want this brought in sooner rather than later. That's because they're worried about the spread of the virus from younger groups of society through to the elderly and the more vulnerable. And that's something we've seen in France in the last couple of weeks. They also want the government to get its house in order on test and trace, and it might give them some breathing space to do that after a truly terrible week of stories on that. Now, we've also been hearing about tougher penalties for those who don't follow the rules. And this comes on the day that we actually heard about a case in Bolton of a guy who didn't quarantine when he came back from abroad. He then went on a pub crawl and infected several people.
OK, Naomi, thank you. Naomi Grimley there.